Oh, here we have it. Getting some people in now. Okay. Well, we're getting up. The number of attendees is building as we speak. It's now up to 21. I'll just give it a few more minutes and we will start the ball rolling. Hello to everyone that can see us. I think we've got 26. So I think maybe we will start. Good morning, everybody. I'm Roxanne West, a facilitator for the safety groups in Northwest Sydney and also Central Coast. So while we're going through this period, we're decided to put it all together for the webinar. We did try the Zoom calls last time. This time it's a webinar. And we are very fortunate to have three great speakers today. Two of them are from Hickson Lawyers. Some of you know Warwick. Warwick's been part of our group in the Central Coast and has also spoken at the Northwest group as well. So, so we have the two solicitors from Hickson Lawyers, and we also have Lisa McQueen, who runs a very high-profile COVID-19 cleaning company, and she's going to be talking a little bit about cleaning workplaces post this period, well, during this period as well. So we're now got 33 and still building up. So I think we will start because we did say we'd start at 8. So for everyone that's just joined, can you go to the bottom of the screen, or sometimes at the top of the screen? There is a Q&A panel down the bottom, and well, on my screen it's down the bottom, but I believe with some laptops it's up the top. A Q&A. If you have any questions that you want answered during this period, can you put the questions there? I will review those and pass them on to the people speaking at the end of the period of our conversations. And there is also a little chat box. If you're stuck or you want to talk to me or someone individually, that's fine as well. But if you can put your questions into Q&A, that would be great. So today we're going to be talking about disease in the workplace. And it's no longer a theoretical risk. But Warwick Ryan is a partner at Hickson Lawyers and is a recognised specialist in employment law and workplace relations. His practice also includes advising clients on workplace trauma, disability from the employment law, work health and safety, and workers' compensation premium perspective. Christopher McCourt, or Chris, is a solicitor at Hickson Lawyers and has 20 years experience in managing risk as an insurance broker. Chris specialises in workers' compensation and more recently has incorporated in his advice the risks arising from work health and safety. So we now have 37 participants, and I'm going to hand it over to you, Warwick.
Okay. Thank you, Roxanne, and good morning to everyone. We're still all getting used to this this webinar. It's a bit different than a seminar, and I can't use diversionary tactics if I run into areas where I don't know the answer, which I'm sure there may be some of them. But we'll muddle on regardless. My background is primarily as an employment lawyer who plays in the space of work health and safety in relation to my clients as it arises. So the issue that we're dealing with, or that we're going to talk about today with disease, has many dimensions to it. And it has dimensions strictly from a work health and safety perspective. And we're going to perhaps take a slightly practical approach to that later on when I'm going to introduce Lisa McQueen, who actually runs a company which does specialist cleaning in this area. We're also going to explore the workers' compensation dimensions and what iCare's response to this, both in relation to the disease and also the psychological aspect which may emerge. So the return to work, my experience as a professional in advising clients is initially there was a great flurry as employers were seeking to navigate this catastrophe or looming catastrophe in how to keep their businesses operating, how to pay their staff in a very difficult environment. All the while, staff were particularly nervous about going out into public and indeed attending work. And the government stepped in fairly quickly and I guess alleviated employers of the responsibility to make some tough decisions around workspaces when they shut down a whole range of industry and directed all employees that could to work from home. So that's been my experience. I've been working from home, but I've also been going into the office. So workers' fears to some degree have been allayed. Of course, that's not been the case for frontline health workers and of course those working in the area of food retailing, at your conventional Aldi, Coles, Woolworths outlets. They've had to continue working and of course being at close quarters with the public, and there's been measures put into place to deal with that. So there's a whole mix of issues that have been, and genuine fears that have beset both employers and employees, and in a way that we've really never encountered. And I appreciate the word unprecedented is no longer unprecedented. In fact, it's getting a fairly regular run these days, but it is a world that we're operating in. So that's the framework, I guess, that I'm speaking to you today. Traditionally, I've done a lot of work health and safety over the years, as I said, for clients, and almost all of that work health and safety has related to issues that are more conventional, such as lifting accidents. Obviously, fall from heights has been something that I've been involved in a number of occasions, electrocutions, those sorts of conventional injuries that arise in workplaces. And they arise in probably the workplaces that you would predict, more commonly construction and mining and what have you, where you get quite significant trauma. And that, of course, those risks can continue. But employers have never really had to confront disease as a genuine risk within the workplace. And I'm initially going to look at something a little bit more benign and something that we've lived with for a while, which is the question of just the flu, because, and don't misunderstand what I'm saying here, I'm not suggesting that what we're dealing with here with COVID-19 is the equivalent to the flu, because there've been a lot of commentary around leaders who've taken that position, and it's not been favourable. But I think my initial point is that employers, to some degree, have ignored this area to their detriment. So if we just imagine that there was a particular condition that someone had. Maybe it's a form of epilepsy, palsy, maybe it's something that's acquired, a parasite, whatever it is, that allowed someone to come into the workplace and, that manifested in them a tendency to flail around zombie-like in an uncontrolled fashion, thrashing out against all who was in their immediate vicinity, knocking over their fellow staff members as they entered the lift and got out of the lift, causing all manners of bruising and broken wrists and various fractures. If there was a condition like that, employers would be right onto it, and that person would not be permitted in the workplace. Now, the flu, we have lived with influenza for years as employers. And yet what we've done is to some degree, we've largely ignored it. Yes, we've introduced the flu shot, but I cannot remember the time that employers have earnestly discussed as a major work health and safety issue, influenza or the flu. Now, just so happens that, last season, was one of the worst seasons we've encountered, kind of ironically coming into. In fact, there were 300,000 people who presented for treatment in relation to the flu. Now that does not include the common cold. So that's 300,000 people with a condition that genuinely puts them out of the office, and for a lot of them in bed for at least some days. And that is and there were over 800, I've heard reports of 900 deaths last year in that flu season. And there would have been deaths, obviously, with people who've got, they've got, I think the phrase they use, comorbidity. They've got conditions that are often in parallel. But would not have been too different from COVID. So in fact, far more people died last year from the flu than have died from COVID. Now, that's largely, of course, it would have been very different if the governments around the country and the federal government had not stepped in and acted as they had and dealt with it so well. And we could have ended up like a similar trajectory of Sweden or the UK, etc. But it does make a point that the flu is has been a disease that we've lived with for a while, for forever, and indeed leads to often people taking a week to 2 weeks off work. Now that is a big hit. Now the other point with the influenza is that it is contagious. It's contagious in the same manner as COVID-19 is contagious. It's contagious in relation to, and I'm sure Lisa will give you more details about this in due course, but it's contagious in relation to the issue of droplets on surfaces, droplets through the air, people not covering up when they sneeze. I cannot tell you the number of times I've sat on trains where people have just openly sneezed in carriages. And so it was a highly communicable disease. And of course, it was done so in a way that employers really did nothing to deal with that fact within the office. And in fact, for many, many years, there's been an unspoken mantra from employers that if you stay at home and when you're unwell and you're in a key role, that somehow reflects badly upon you. People may say mealy-mouthed things about staying home. Of course you should stay home, but there's, in many workplaces, there's a real culture where you come to work regardless. So we've had a dry run for many years with influenza, and employers have not taken it seriously, and to their detriment. This issue of people, so we've got a situation where people are actively bringing in a health risk into the office environment, and it's often done so in a manner where it is tacitly encouraged by employers. Now, the cost in relation to flu is enormous on business. And if you've got 2 or 3 key people taking 2 weeks off and they're instrumental in managing key projects around the place, that can have a massive impact upon any business. So employers have been dealing with this issue for a long period of time, and suddenly we've got the older brother or older sister of this disease, which is potentially, and it has shown itself to be far more threatening and far more damaging. So there's an element of, well, we were warned and we haven't taken it seriously, but we all are now. So there's the question, I guess, for us is, how do we now deal with a situation of people needing to come to work as people start returning to workplaces? Who's going to come to work and who isn't? Well, there's an obvious question here around who's most likely to attend. And that is the problem of casuals. Casual employees are a real danger to businesses. They're a danger to businesses because casual employees often work in jobs that are lower paid. They are often coming from households where money is important. Money is important in all households, of course, but is necessary for essentials, for paying bills, for just getting through life. And in the case of our society, where so many people these days are solo, casual employment is the difference between paying the rent and not paying the rent. So this is a real problem for employers. How do we deal with employees returning to the workplace when they shouldn't? The other, of course, is traditionally there's been in many workplaces, and I've got a lot of clients where employees have traditionally used up their sick leave every year. Now, when you've used up your sick leave and you get sick, the employee is not entitled to be paid. This presents a dilemma. So what do we do as employers in responding to this situation? Because it can cause a very, very significant issue for all of us. Well, firstly, if people do turn up to work, there's some basic measures that employers can take to deal with the disease. And we have been inundated over recent weeks and months in relation to measures that employers can take to deal with, or for people can take, I should say, to avoid contracting COVID. Now, funnily enough, or ironically, we're having a very good flu season, apparently, or we're certainly on track for one. We're going to have very low rates of infection because of the social distancing. So employers need to create safe environments for the workplace. That sounds twee, I get it. But we need to do that for two basic reasons at a practical level, leaving aside the legal issues. One is to ensure that staff turn up for work. That's a real problem. If it's not a safe workspace, if you cannot provide and do not provide a safe workspace, then employers are entitled not to attend the work. The second thing is we need to provide measures within the workplace which provide a level of safety, because you are going to have people who turn up to work unwittingly, or indeed perhaps with suspicion, or indeed with full knowledge that they are not well. And somehow or other your measures are going to have to deal with such people, because your vetting system to vet those who attend work is not always going to be flawless. So it's critical that the measures that are taken within the workplace address these issues. Otherwise, you're either not going to have a workforce to meet the demand, or ultimately you're going to have a workforce that's going to become very unwell very quickly. So the basic risks, as you know, under the Work Health and Safety Act are mapped out at both Section 17 and Section 19, but for the purpose of just today's presentation, it's the obligation to eliminate risks so far as reasonably practicable. Now, what's interesting in relation to reasonably practicable is that there's a list under the Act as to what factors go into this. And in many workplaces, particularly office workplaces, they are now dealing with a level of danger that they've never dealt with before. In our law firm, we have a very comprehensive work health and safety policy. But to be honest with you, a lot of it is really the contrivance of lawyers for events that are very, very unlikely to occur. Because largely, apart from bullying and harassment and psychological injuries that may arise from pressured work environments, it's very unlikely that people become seriously injured in an office environment. But now that's all changed, and employers who've never really had to think about these issues, now need to look closely through this concept of what is reasonably practicable. So just running through those quite quickly. The likelihood of the hazard or the risk occurring. Well, we know from the flu experience that in fact the likelihood is quite high if you have a person who presents with a condition. And we know that, I'll talk about it a little bit more shortly, we know that from the Newmarch aged care facility catastrophe, and of course the Cedar meat processing outlet and down in Melbourne, where one person can present a massive hazard to a whole raft of people within the workplace. The second point, the degree of harm that might result. Well, I don't need to explain that. You've been watching the news every night. The degree of harm is significant, if not for a younger worker, for those that they then pass the disease on to, other older people in their network. The degree of harm is very high. What the person knows about the risk, well, employers are going to be held potentially to a high standard on this, particularly larger employers. There would be an expectation that there is a raft of material around and you should be educating yourself on this. And that would be a very, very, that would be a largely irrelevant factor to be taken into account. If an employer phoned up and said, really don't understand this COVID thing, haven't heard much about it, not going to wash. The availability and suitability of ways to eliminate, minimize the risk. Well, there's a raft of material. Chris will refer to it, but it's on the Safe Work Australia website. There's an enormous amount of material there in relation to dealing with this. And of course, the cost associated with, well, there are some challenges around there for a number of businesses, but there's going to have to be a really carefully thought through strategy about how to enable social distancing, to be talking to those who provide your air conditioning about issues of airflow and how you minimize situations where you have droplets passing through the air. And of course, the day-to-day cleaning, which Lisa will talk about. So these factors here are reasonably practicable are going to be issues that those who have responsibility for work and safety are going to have to familiarise themselves with in a way that they've never really had to do before. It's going to require you re-looking at your work health and safety procedure policies from top to bottom. Now, what happens? How does this? This is just a sample because there's very few cases around disease that have ended up being prosecution, but there's a disease that's been around, again, funnily enough, passed on by bats, called the Hendra virus disease, and it's passed on by another animal, which is horses. So the bats somehow or other pass it on to the horses, they acquire it, and then it gets passed on to the humans, i.e., Wuhan wet market scenario. Such diseases, as I understand it, there it is for you, learn a new word, zoonotic diseases. Diseases passed from animals to humans. So in this particular case, and it's a problem that vets have had to deal with, particularly in Queensland. They attempted to deal with a horse and they didn't adopt best practice. And in fact, both cases, there were two cases, I've just selected one of them. They undertook a procedure where it involved the horse owner in the procedure and didn't have PPP. And also hadn't marked out certain entry and egress arrangements, and so therefore didn't minimise the potential decontamination. Now, in this case, that was enough. On advice, the veterinarian in that case pleaded guilty. Now, the fine in that case was relatively low. No one was actually injured. No one was hurt. No one contracted the disease. Now, in that case, if you contract Hendra virus disease, it's got quite a high rate of fatality. So it's a high risk disease. But so the risk factor was enough to trigger the prosecution in that case, and indeed the other case, the person in the other case, again another horse owner who was at risk of infection, didn't in fact contract the disease, but again there was a prosecution in that case. So the situation in Newmarch has been much publicised, but it really highlights the problem. Now, with Newmarch, you've got ordinary workers in an industry where casualisation is quite high, particularly less so amongst the nurses, but amongst the other staff, the carers, casualisation is high. Now, there's varying reports in relation to the individual concerned there, but the suggestion is that that person attended work for 6 days, and they were either asymptomatic or they had a, open quote, scratchy throat, close quote. One of the problems that you're going to face as employers is that the people who walk into the place, your employees as they return, may be carrying the disease and they may not know it. That has always been the case with the flu, but the period for COVID is a bit longer. From what my reading is, it's closer to 4 days. I'm sure many people know more about it than me. But that presents a real problem. So you've got to set up an environment internally where you've got to assume that everyone has it. Everyone is carrying that disease. That should be the framework in which you're operating your business. Because for much of the time, you may not know that. So in this particular case, the worker who was obviously dealing at close quarters with residents and with their colleagues, they operated for 6 days. Now, circling back to the question of how do you keep people out? If the person had a scratchy throat or had some symptoms, then they're in a dilemma. If they're in a relatively low-paid business, employment, low-paid employment, and their household works from week to week, then the idea of taking off 14 days is going to be a real challenge. Now, when we come out of this, and issues like, for some businesses, JobKeeper is not a factor. Now, if someone is presenting, then they may have sick leave. If they're a casual, you need to think about whether or not you're going to pay them to take that time off. Because if you don't, then you're going to be in a situation where you're going to heighten the risk of people attending work when they're unwell. In most cases, in probably the vast majority, it's going to turn out to be no more than a cold, or indeed, at worst case, the flu. But if you don't pay them when they're showing symptoms, then they're far more likely to attend work. Now, in this case, as of today, I've just lost track whether, and I don't mean in any way to be flippant, but whether it was 18 or 19 people have died as a result of that worker attending work under those circumstances. Now, in relation to what's happening in Melbourne at the meatworks, it has shut down. It's shut down for a period of while it's been cleaned. There's 300 workers who've been off work. It's been massively disruptive. It's drawn attention to that business. I'm sure it has had a dramatic effect on its sales process too. So this question of how you're going to deal with people coming into your workplace is profound. Whether you're going to have regular temperature checks, what sort of measures you're going to put into place, whether you're going to have a testing regime, and how you're going to roll that out within the workplace. At this point, I might introduce, because one of the issues is the question of providing a safe work environment for employees, and not just providing one, but actually that the employees perceive that it is safe to return. Now, one of the critical issues that we're all a bit paranoid about is surfaces. How do I know that a surface is clean? Can you clean these surfaces? How often do you need to clean these surfaces? And how do you maintain a workplace where you can put your hand on your heart and say, we have acted to the highest reasonable level to ensure that our employees are safe from this virus, at least in relation to contracting it from surfaces. Now, Lisa, do you want to talk a little bit about the work you've been doing, particularly over the last month or two in relation to this space? You might unmute yourself.
Here we go. Thanks, Warwick, and good morning to everybody. Yes, we have been doing considerable work in this area, and it just continues. It really has been an incredibly, and I'll use your word again, Warwick, an incredibly unprecedented time in our business. In like 25 years of operation, we've never seen anything like it. Now, with the with workplaces, what we've been experiencing has been, it started out with a huge amount of panic, as you can expect, where we were cleaning actively, COVID-19 confirmed case workplaces, and we were doing that on a very regular basis, excuse me, right around Australia, and now we're moving into that period where it's that return to work, and those employers employers everywhere want to be making sure that they're going to be seen to be doing enough to protect their employees and also their clients that may come in. So with that in mind, they have been going to extraordinary lengths to have aggressive cleaning regimes for their businesses. And I might just take everyone back to the olden days in cleaning, which was about 8 weeks ago. And 8 weeks ago, when we did a clean, you would expect it would be, we'd clean a surface, we'd mop, we'd vacuum, we'd dust, we'd do all of those things that many of you would have seen your own cleaners within your organizations do. But that type of cleaning just doesn't apply anymore. And it's changed the face of cleaning forever. So the people that used to go and buy a mop and a bucket and a vacuum from Kmart or Target and hang out a shingle and say, hey, we're commercial cleaners, that just doesn't fly anymore. Because with this new world that we're all living in, and certainly, Warwick, you've discussed so many of the issues surrounding the risk. Now, it's imperative that the employers and businesses are seen to be proactive in taking steps that are going to minimise risk at all costs. So, for example, when we're doing a clean nowadays, it's all about the sanitisation process and how can we create an environment that is at the highest level of sanitisation. So the way that we do it, and this is, how this differs to cleaning in the olden days, was the way that we do it now is always a 3-step process, because you can't sanitize any surface that isn't already clean. So we have to clean first. We do a regular clean first. Then you go back and you have to clean that surface again by applying the hospital grade antiviral product and the antiviral disinfectant. Now that's applied either by using a fogger, which we often do, or using a sprayer, or simply applying it to a surface. And then we leave that disinfectant to sit on the surface for a minimum of 10 minutes. And during that period, that 10 minutes, and sometimes we leave it longer, but during that period, that is when the active ingredients contained within that disinfectant are killing the bacteria that are on the surfaces. So then after that step 2 is completed, we then go back again and we wipe over all surfaces. We wipe the disinfectant off. So after that is the only way to disinfect a surface properly, according to the World Health Organization and also the Australian Government Department of Health. We've done considerable work for New South Wales Health as well. So this is very much in alignment with best practice. And after that has been done, you then have a lovely sanitised surface. However, if you have someone come into the organisation and they're showing symptoms or they're asymptomatic, then of course that only lasts as long as until someone comes through who may have the virus. So employers are very much aware of this now, and they're looking at it and saying, well, how can we avoid that? How can we minimise any continuing risk? And they're taking a few steps. So one that we're seeing a lot of right now is the temperature checks as people arrive in for work. As the return to work, people transitioning back into the actual workplace, we're seeing the 4 square metre rule being applied, but instead of it being 4 square metres, we're seeing 8 to 10 square metres. So to allow for, furniture and desks and what have you. The complete abolition of any form whatsoever of hot desking. Employees that are returning back into the workplace are only able to use their desk, their phone, their stapler, the things that are on their desk. There is absolutely no sharing allowed. And then they're employing companies such as mine to come in during the day and provide additional support around those busy times. So normally 11 until 2 is the busiest period in an office, catering for the lunch break period. So during that period, we're in the offices. We are cleaning the kitchen in between usage. We're constantly high touch point cleaning and sanitizing and essentially resetting. So if someone comes and makes a cup of coffee, they touch the kettle or they use the microwave or the tap or whatever, before another person's allowed into the kitchen to do the same thing, we reset that for them and have it all re-sanitized. So they're really taking extraordinary measures. And then the same thing applies to things like the bathrooms. The bathrooms are constantly being cleaned. And the other phenomenon that we're really seeing a lot of, and some of you may already be doing this in your own organizations, but the appointment, it's normally someone in the HR department, but the appointment of a coronavirus or COVID-19 champion for the business. And that person's role is to be the eyes and ears of the organization. And if they see any potentially people are a little bit too close or someone's using the meeting room and there's too many people in that space, they are being the champions of that and just gently reminding people that they need to be, a bit further apart, just to give them a sense of what is required in the workplace. So those things are becoming very, very prevalent, and I think that the demand from companies such as myself for proving products are, the best in class, if you want to call it that, and also being able to, they're wanting to work with companies who are highly recognised in this field, because it is definitely an area of skill within the cleaning industry, and it will continue to be so as we move forward. Oh, you might need to unmute, Warwick.
Sorry, let's just broadly, what sort of industries are you finding yourself cleaning in general terms?
Right now, we are doing a tremendous amount of work in the construction industry, huge. In government departments, a lot of government departments at the moment. Pharmacies, we've done many pharmacies, and quite high-end retail, you know, really very high-end global brands. We've done a lot of that for them. And then your regular corporates. And, you know, the regular corporates, one that I will just point out really quickly is there's a lot of beautiful office space around there. I know you guys at Hickson's have beautiful offices, and the use of, you know, meeting room pods, if you want to call them, where it's soft furnishings, it's all very lovely, it's very comfortable. We are seeing nobody is using that, because the soft furnishings are much more difficult for cleaning and much more expensive to clean for the employer. So we're seeing a real shift away from that, because the virus sits on those soft furnishings for you know, quite a number of hours, and the perceived risk is higher to be using those areas. So with, you know, and sorry, that's just a side to you know, the industries that we're doing, but pretty much across the board, Warwick, pretty much across the board.
Okay.
Oh, lots of schools too, lots of schools.
So is vinyl going to make a comeback, Lisa?
Gosh, I hope not.
It sounds like it
will. It will, and I think that you know, just those soft, cushiony meeting rooms and things like that. They're just not practical now.
Yeah, just listening to that. Obviously, that's going to have an impact upon internal design, but it sounds like you've really become you've transitioned from being people where you sent your workers out, where your contractors went out at sort of 10 o'clock at night or 8 o'clock at night and did claims and then etc. You're now part of the organisation on a day-to-day basis, embedded in there, like staff in Downton Abbey.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you transition from being at least sort of 50% aesthetics through to about 98% work health and safety, injury or disease prevention.
Absolutely. And interestingly, whereas before people didn't really want to see the cleaners, they wanted them before or after. Now, from an organisational point of view, the optics look better to have the cleaning team with, you know, there, so that everyone can see them. Our guys have, you know, they've got their high vis vest on, and they're very, you know, they're very easy to spot in any organisation. But yes, you're quite right that it's a completely different way of looking at your cleaning services now, because they want to get their employees to come back. They want their employees to feel safe, and they also want to be seen to be doing the right thing as an employer and as a business.
Certainly. Now, Chris, I might bring you in at this point. So when things go terribly wrong, and when you do in fact have someone who comes into organisation that in a way that's happening in Melbourne in McDonald's, and indeed at the meat processing unit and in Sydney with Newmarch, you will have claims presumably, because people will need to take time off work. They won't want that on their sick leave, or indeed it may become much more dramatic than that. As I understand it, the long-term effect of this disease for some people, even if they don't die, can be terrible. It can leave you with all sorts of residual conditions. How's iCare approaching all of this?
Yeah, thanks, Warwick. There have been a couple of legislation changes that have come through in New South Wales. What we've seen is, and thank you for flicking us through, in the recent sort of legislation, emergency measures, miscellaneous bill that was assented on the 14th of May 2020, so effectively it is in place. We saw that for any business in the list provided below, and I'll go through that in a second, cover is provided to them, and it's assumed that if they are diagnosed with COVID-19, and the diagnosis needs to be through the usual measures, they will have been assumed to have contracted it through the course of their employment. So for us in workers' comp space, that's a bit of a reverse onus on us in the defendant space. Looking at this, there is a little get out of jail free card, because I think it's fair to say employment may not be the only place that you pick up COVID-19. There has been a number of places throughout the community where it can be contracted. There's a little, and it's in brackets, unless the contrary is established. So there is an opportunity there for employers to attempt to prove that COVID-19 wasn't contracted within their business.
Right.
But the cover has been provided to workers within the retail industry. So exclusive online retail stores aren't included in that. So the healthcare sector, that includes ambulance officers and public health employees, disability and aged care facilities, educational institutions, preschools, schools and tertiary institutions, going through to police and emergency services, the refugees, halfway houses, passenger transport services, libraries, courts, tribunals, correctional centres, detention centres, restaurant clubs and hotels, construction industry, places of public entertainment or instruction, so cinemas, museums, galleries, and the cleaning industry. The interesting part about some of this is a lot of these industries have been closed recently, so I think we do need to have a little bit of caution at the moment around whether or not it really was contracted at work. Also understanding, sort of going on the casual employee, where has the employee been for the last number of days before they actually came to their shift at work? Because if you have, the restaurant and clubs and hotel industry, for example, you do have a number of employees that are only doing 1 shift a week, 2 shifts a week, and aren't there at your normal 9 to 5 days a week sort of program. So there is scope there for employers to be really certain about where their employees have been if they do come to them having contracted COVID-19.
Okay, now, Chris, I'm mindful of the time, and there are some questions I want to get to them.
Yep.
So just the other side of this is the question of, it's not just a physical injury. You're going to have a situation with, for example, an employer does not provide someone like Lisa's organisation to come in and clean thoroughly. You might have employees who put on claims with psych claims related to this. Is that
So this information that Warwick's just put up there, the table, has come straight from the CIRA website. So far, CIRA have had 255 claims. I think that math works out there, and notifications. So there's only been 4 actual confirmed cases of COVID-19. Of the 19 exposure cases, my understanding, and this is unfortunately a little bit gross, some of the exposure cases have come from Coles employees who have unfortunately been spat on by someone who has purported to have COVID-19. So they are a little bit unfortunate, those cases. Some of the notifications with regards to exposure come from where an employee has been known to have COVID-19, come to the workplace. The workplace has gone, you've got COVID-19, everyone has been sent home. The store has closed down, got Lisa on board, undertaken the deep clean, and come out the other side with actually no one within the business contracting the disease. The big one of concern, as you say, Warwick, is the mental disorder claims that are coming out of this. And as you can see, they're by far the greatest number that we've seen. If you could just flick to the next slide for us, Warwick. The impact from the death of a COVID-19 case is quite significant to an employer. So you're looking at it going from 14 days where the person may be off work to, if there is a fatality, an automatic lump sum payment to a dependent is the $827,400. So if you don't want this against your workers' comp premium as a claim, that's why this needs to be taken seriously. The next slide just shows the impact of mental disorder claims, and this is one that I wanted to get to, and I'll just wrap up here for your work. The biggest difference when we get into that space is the number of days that they have off work. As you can see there, traumatic joint and wound lacerations are in the 48 and 22-day range, but your average time off for a mental disorder claim is 144 days. So that's extraordinary. And as we can all appreciate, the premium impacts that would flow from something like that are really quite significant.
It sounds to me, Chris, that there's probably more likely to be more psychological claims to do with COVID-19 than actual claims for COVID-19.
Yeah, and to be honest, Warwick, you and I both know we could have a whole presentation on psychological injuries in itself. We anticipate that that's really where the volume, not so much the volume, but very much the cost of claims is going to come from. And it has come when I've been speaking to the insurers. What they are seeing come through are incidents like Lisa referred to, where people are scared about going to work. And I've noticed some of the comments here about the working from home. One claim that we have seen is where the claimant did have anxiety about going to work. And the anxiety was that there was no work from home provisions made available to her. And as a result, the claim was lodged from there.
Okay, Chris, I noticed we got 8 minutes left.
Yeah.
So, and they've got, I think, 11
There
questions.
are a number of questions, yeah.
So I might just, now, Roxanne, do you want to come in at this point, or how do you want to run this?
Okay. Well, you guys, you can see the questions from the various people. How about if I just read out the questions and then you can answer, please? Yes?
Sounds good.
All right. So a great presentation. So thank you. I appreciate that it is best practice necessary to ask staff to be tested should they be symptomatic or asymptomatic. But what are the reasonable options when recruiting, a risk in itself without a COVID-19 element? Can an employer impose COVID-19 testing as part of a pre-medical examination? This is, of course, taking into consideration the incubation period variation. Of course, the employer would need to be very prudent about the data that they collect if the worker is positive, that is privacy implications. Thanks in advance from Dennis.
The short answer is yes. There'd be no problem with doing that. Obviously, it's going to have a limited life. For some industries, say event management, it would be quite relevant, where people coming are hired, do an event, etc. in that situation. But I think the more relevant question is the ongoing testing of staff, as Lisa highlighted, where you've got employers doing temperature testing. And that's probably that's the slightly curlier one. But anyway, the answer is yes.
Okay, to Lisa, do you have any idea of life of virus on differing surfaces? You did mention the soft and the hard surface, but do you have any idea of the life of it?
Sure, good question. Yes, so on a hard surface, we're looking at about 12 hours. On the softer surfaces, we're looking at about 8 hours. But, you know, with the soft surface during the day, when you've got people potentially sitting down using that space for a meeting, it's just too dangerous. And again, it can't be cleaned that easily.
Thank you. Now the question from Larry, will a copy of this Zoom presentation be made available? It will. It's been recorded now. It'll be sent out in 3 to 4 business days. So that will be available. I'll send it out to all of the people on my list, and Sarah from the Institute will send it out to everyone there, or it'll be available there. Now there's someone at Concord Hospital, non-clinical, non-essential staff were forced to be exposed to COVID-19 due to their building being commandeered from them and turned into a staff health COVID-19 test centre. and deal with other staff presenting to that staff health test centre with symptoms, and these workers in that building were made to do this without being provided protective equipment. Staff throughout all Concord hospitals were advised to report to this fever clinic if they had COVID-19 symptoms, and the other staff who manned this clinic were forced to do so without protective equipment, basic consultation or anything. And when they complained to the executive by the GM, they were castigated for being alarmist and ignored and chastised. That's just more or less a statement. I can hear what you're saying, Kristen. Do you want the guys?
Well, Roxanne, I'll quickly comment on that. Under both the Work Health and Safety Act and indeed the Fair Work Act, even with the, in Concord Hospital, we're not called a JobKeeper, but even if it was a JobKeeper arrangement, there is always an obligation to consult where there's a change. With Work Health and Safety, the consultation is an ongoing obligation to consult with staff around safety. And obviously there's often the committees that are set up around that, and they're often a good vehicle for that. And if it wasn't done so, then that would be potentially a breach of the Work Health and Safety, and it would be something that could be reportable to Safe Work New South Wales by an employee. In relation to obviously where you've got a workplace which has been commandeered for other purposes, and you are either having to work alongside in a different format or indeed being moved to another building, that would be a major change. So under almost all awards, there would be an obligation to consult in that, and failure to do so would be a breach.
Okay. It also said if they are exposed negligently and contacted something else but not COVID-19 via employer negligence, that would be the same, would it not? Well, sorry.
I'm not quite. Yeah, I can see it. I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, Chris can speak to this, but the bottom line is it's too complicated to deal with without more specifics. But yes, you can still sue your employer where there's where you contract a disease or indeed an injury that meets a certain threshold. And in many workplaces, there are other avenues because of the way companies are structured. Often you can sue it may be the landlord, it may be the building manager, it may be any number of avenues you can sue in a situation where people are exposed to whatever the risk is, whether it be COVID-19 or otherwise.
Okay, so here's another one from Dennis. That was really helpful, Lisa. Yeah, I thought it was great too. I've always been concerned when looking at commercial cleaners. A lot rarely change their disposable gloves. This is so frustrating. This is due to many factors such as risk perception, language barriers, substandard communications, lack of supervision, lack of training, etc., etc. Do you think that other cleaning companies are addressing this? Thanks heaps.
From what I'm hearing, they're slow. They're slow to address it, but I think that we'll start to see that being addressed more and more as it becomes just the norm. But yes, you're absolutely right. The need to, to be able to don and doff the PPE equipment correctly, it all comes down to the training and the cleaners who are at the coal face, whether they're cleaning a confirmed case or whether they're cleaning an office just on a regular ongoing basis, the correct PPE, it's vital that they wear it. And changing gloves is a very big part of that whole process.
Is there a current standard, Lisa, is there a current standard applicable to this particular style of clean? Is there any ISO?
Yes, we work to, we're triple ISO certified, so we work to the quality standards, the safety standards, and also the environmental management standards. And we've been doing that for 9 years. So it's something that's deeply ingrained in how we operate our business and how we train our staff.
So that would it be, if someone's got a cleaners, contract cleaners, that'd be a question they might want to ask is whether or not they're accredited in a similar fashion.
Oh, 100%. Because if you don't have the right systems and processes in place to manage something like this, it could potentially lead to, litigation. It could lead to an outbreak and really destroy somebody's business. So it's vital, like I said earlier, that the old days of using someone with a mop and a bucket and a vacuum that they just bought because they were the cheapest option, those days are just over. You just can't work that way anymore.
Just in relation to the question regarding contracting and public transport, I think what I'm hearing you say, Chris, is that essentially if you work within particular industries and you contract the disease, you're essentially deemed to contract it in that workplace, and it's really it's incumbent upon the employer to prove otherwise. And it might be quite difficult. It would be quite difficult for the employer to prove that it wasn't contracted at the workplace. It was contracted outside, unless, of course, they could sort of show that they've got Lisa-like people in the place cleaning all day, every day, and there's no possibility of any germs, etc. But it would still be tough.
Yeah, it'd still be tough, but I think it also goes back to those industries and those workers and where they are rostered on and off. And please excuse my dog in the background. There's clearly a bird in my backyard at the moment. And understanding where they have been in those days prior to their shift at work. We appreciate that everyone isn't at work 24/7. So I think we do need to be aware of that. And the opportunity is there for the employer, if they consider that the worker has only had that one shift during the week, that they can refer it off for some legal advice on that issue if there is a workers' compensation claim. And that provides that opportunity for an independent review by the specialist. Okay.
So I just noticed Chris Hadrell, who is indeed a work health and safety consultant, points out that there are still obviously the option for employers to work at home if it's reasonably practical to do so. And that is currently the situation, but at some point, and this is going to be an interesting transition and probably for a whole other topic as to whether or not we've got the death of the office, or in fact, employers are going to, in some industries, going to force people to return to work. That's going to unfold over the next few months, those sorts of issues. Currently, yes, they can work at home. That question, reasonably practicable, is obviously quite debatable. There's a number of cases coming before the Fair Work Commission where people are arguing on those sorts of issues. But that is, at the moment, when people are still not going to the offices in droves, but that will change over time. So I guess these issues, if they're not directly relevant to your business now, they will be. What are the implications for trainers seeking to upskill new and existing workers in COVID infection control? I don't know the answer to that. Roxanne, have you got any idea as to who's running courses around on these sorts of issues?
Well, I think during the time that there was the free TAFE skills training that was provided, and I do know some of the clients are providing training to their staff, but I don't think it's that they have to do that, but it's something that, no, sorry, can't answer that one. Leave that, please.
Okay. Right, well, I think we're coming up to time anyway. In fact, we're just 3 minutes over. So the final comment is, if a worker's on the way to work and exposed, are they covered? And I think we've addressed that. The presumption will be that if they work in those industries that are listed, they will be covered. And it really is incumbent upon the employer to prove otherwise, and that may be pretty difficult to do. The presumption there that if they're under work and they're exposed, well, that's kind of presumptive. I think in some industries that is likely to be the case. I live on the Central Coast. I travel a long way into the cities, and sometimes I catch the train. And so there would be an argument where I indeed able to get to seek workers' comp. Being a partner, I'm not. But there would be an argument there that exposure for an hour and a half each way on a train is probably higher than it would be in my office. So there would be a situation there, and of course I'm in an industry which is not covered by the amendments. But I think that we've addressed the matters. Roxanne, do you want to?
Yes, I think so. Martha is a HR consultant on our group, and she is saying that there is some access to COVID-19 online training, and that's available for everybody. And again, Larry Ting has also sent us information, so we can include that in the presentation, which will be helpful for those that are looking at training, the COVID-19 infection control training or whatever, the whole lot. So look, I think that was rabbiting on here. It was really great. Thank you to the panelists, Warwick, Chris and Lisa. Very, very interesting. I think there's lots of queries and questions coming out of it, but time has crept up on us. Thank you for the Australian Institute of Health and Safety for putting this on, and Sarah in the background who's organising all of this. And yeah, this information will go out to, will be available, the presentation will be available, and also the recording of this webinar. So thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Okay,
We'll
thank
see you
you.
next month. I'm not too sure who we are actually going to have as speaker as yet, or the date, but that information will be sent out. All right. Thank you, guys.